Good morning, students. Welcome to Conceptum classes. Let me first remind you, please don't forget to subscribe this channel if you are the first time viewer of this channel. Today's our topic is addition of vectors. It is vector algebra, 12th class maths, lecture number 4, addition of vectors. How two vectors are added. दो वेक्टर को हम कैसे ऐड कर सकते हैं. You must remember that two vectors can be added by two methods. We can add two vectors by two methods. One is triangle law of vectors. And second is parallelogram law of vectors. These two laws, triangle law and parallelogram law, they are both used for the addition of two vectors. Let me first take this triangle law of vectors. Triangle law of vectors. What is triangle law of vectors? ये होता क्या है triangle law of vectors? Triangle law of vectors is that if two sides of a triangle represent two vectors, यानी अगर एक triangle के दो side दो vectors को represent करते हैं, then the resultant of these two vectors is the third side of the triangle. If two sides of a triangle are represented as two vectors, then the resultant vector of these two vectors is the third side of the triangle. यानी अगर दो साइड ट्राइंगल के दो वेक्टर्स रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं, तब जो the third side of the triangle है, that represents the resultant vector. That means the addition of these two vectors is represented by the third vector. यानी अगर मेरे पास एक ट्राइंगल है, ABC, let me suppose that this side AB, it represents vector A, and the side BC represents vector B. Then the resultant of these two vectors, vector A and vector B, is this vector, is the third side of the triangle. So this vector, this third side of the triangle, it represents A vector plus B vector. When you apply triangle law of vectors, you must remember one rule. Note this rule. It is called HT rule. We call it as HT rule. What is this HT rule? That means when you apply triangle law of vectors, then head of one vector, here B is the head of this vector AB, should coincide with the tail of another vector, and this B, this tail of vector BC coincide. Then we apply triangle law. It is called HT rule. Head of one vector should coincide with the tail of another vector. Then the third vector, which is in the reverse order, which is in the reverse direction. यहाँ इसकी डायरेक्शन यहाँ है, इसकी डायरेक्शन यहाँ है, तो इसकी डायरेक्शन यहाँ है, यानी इसकी डायरेक्शन अपोजिट है. तो ये थर्ड साइड ऑफ द ट्रायंगल represents vector A plus vector B. Now let AB be equal to vector A. चलो मान लिया ये AB जो है वेक्टर A है, and BC ये जो BC is vector B. Then the resultant vector AC, अब ये AC जो है it represents AB plus BC, यानी इन दो वेक्टर्स का सम तीसरा साइड ऑफ ट्राइंगल है. दैट मींस वेक्टर A plus वेक्टर B is equal to वेक्टर A plus वेक्टर B. These two sums, and sum of these two sides of a triangle is the resultant vector, is the sum of two vectors. Pause the video and note it down. Now, if we suppose that vector A is equal to A1 I cap plus B1 J cap plus C1 K cap, and vector B is equal to A2 I cap plus B2 J cap plus C2 K cap, then what is the addition of these two vectors? What is vector A plus vector B? Vector A plus vector B will be, you simply add the corresponding objects, the corresponding elements. It will be A1 plus A2 I cap plus B1 plus B2 J cap plus C1 plus C2 K cap. This is the addition of vectors. Now let us move to parallelogram law of vectors. Parallelogram law of vectors. What is parallelogram law of vectors? It is if two vectors are represented by two adjacent sides of a parallelogram, then the diagonal of the parallelogram gives the resultant vector. That is the addition of two vectors. Addition of two vectors. यानी अगर दो एडजेसेंट साइड्स पैरेललोग्राम के दो वेक्टर्स को रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं, तब जो डायगोनल होती है पैरेललोग्राम की, वो उसका रिजल्टेंट वेक्टर होता है, और वही रिजल्टेंट वेक्टर एडिशन ऑफ वेक्टर्स को रिप्रेजेंट करता है. तो यहाँ जब आप वेक्टर लॉ को, पैरेललोग्राम लॉ ऑफ वेक्टर्स को अप्लाई करेंगे, तो यहाँ टीटी रूल का आप याद रखो. कौन सा रूल? टीटी रूल. That means tail of one vector should coincide with the tail of another vector. Let me explain you like this. Let me have a vector AB with A as initial point, A as tail, and B as head. Let me have another vector AD. So here two vectors AB and AD, their tails coincide. This is TT rule. That means tail of one vector should coincide with the tail of another vector. Then the diagonal. This diagonal, it represents the resultant vector. Let me complete the parallelogram. This represents the if vector AB is equal to vector A and AD is equal to vector B, then this AC, the diagonal, it represents vector A plus vector B. Actually, this parallelogram law ऑफ वेक्टर, ये एक्चुअली ट्राइंगल लॉ ऑफ वेक्टर्स ही है, इट्स एक्चुअली ट्राइंगल लॉ ऑफ वेक्टर्स। अगर AD, क्योंकि ABCD एक पैरेललोग्राम है, दैट मींस दिस AD इज इक्वल टू BC। अगर AD वेक्टर मेरे पास B है, तो व्हाट अबाउट BC विल बी वेक्टर B। अब इस पार्ट को छोड़िए आप, लीव दिस पार्ट, you take triangle ABC. AB is a vector A, BC is the vector B. Here head and tail coincide. That means here we can apply triangle law of vectors. Then the third side represents vector A and vector B. This is actually the parallelogram law of vectors. तो यहाँ इसी triangle को भी triangle law of vectors लगा सकता है, तो दोनों triangles मिलाकर parallelogram law of vectors represent करते हैं. This is how we add two vectors. Now, properties of addition of vectors. Now, properties of addition. Number one property, addition of vectors is commutative. Addition of vectors is commutative. That means vector A plus vector B, it will be equal to vector B plus vector A. A plus B, B plus B. Addition of vectors is associative. Addition of vectors is associative. That means vector A plus vector B plus vector C, it will be equal to vector A plus vector B plus vector C is associative. Number third, additive identity. If we have a vector A, if we have a vector A, अब इस वेक्टर A को मैं कौन सा ऐसा वेक्टर ऐड करूं कि ये इसकी आइडेंटिटी बरकरार रहे, यानी कौन सा वेक्टर इसको ऐड करूं कि ये A ही रहे, तो सिंपली we will add null vector, zero vector. A vector plus zero vector is always equal to A vector. यानी यहाँ मैंने A vector को zero vector ऐड किया तो ये मुझे A vector ही आया. Then this zero vector is called identity of A vector. Then additive inverse. Additive inverse. What is additive inverse? Let me have a vector A. मैं वेक्टर A को कौन सा वेक्टर ऐड करूं कि इनका सम जीरो आ जाए, इनका सम जीरो आ जाए. जब मैं वेक्टर A को प्लस नेगेटिव ऑफ वेक्टर A ऐड करूं, यानी A वेक्टर A को इसका नेगेटिव ऐड करूं, तो मुझे जीरो वेक्टर मिलेगा. This minus A is the additive inverse of vector A. This minus A vector is the additive inverse of A vector. That means addition of vectors is commutative. Vector A plus vector B is vector B plus vector A. And addition of vectors is associative. Vector A plus vector B plus vector C is equal to vector A plus vector B plus vector C. And additive identity, यानी एक ऐसा वेक्टर ऐड करो A को कि उसकी आइडेंटिटी लूज न हो जाए, तो जब मैं इसको नल वेक्टर या जीरो वेक्टर ऐड करूंगा तो ये एम्प्टी रहेगा, पर जब ये जीरो वेक्टर है इसको कहते हैं एडिटिव identity of vector A, and additive inverse A plus minus A 0, and minus A vector is the additive inverse of A vector. This is all about addition of vectors. I hope you may have understood all this addition of vectors, how we add two vectors. In the next video, we will discuss the exercise. Next exercise, that means exercise 10.2, whatever it is, we will discuss in the next video. Till then, goodbye. Have a nice day.